How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. This week I'm building a diorama in 1:12 scale featuring this Imperial Stormtrooper from Bandai, as well as a Nexu that I modeled and 3D printed. The Nexu is one of the three monsters seen in Attack of the Clones in the arena. It's the cat-like one that goes after Padme. As far as I know, that's the only time we've ever seen it on screen, but they do have a taxidermied head at Galaxy's Edge. If you're ever there, make sure to keep an eye out for it. I haven't come up with a good backstory for this diorama yet, so I would love to hear what you guys think. Leave a comment describing how he got into this situation and who wins the fight, and I will pin my favorite and make it the official backstory for this diorama. I built up the base with some foam that I cut with my hot wire table. This thing is pretty awesome. I needed to cut out some bricks, and this thing made short work of them. I then used the little bricks to create a retaining wall. I wanted it to look like it was a very old building of some kind, and the damage was not caused by conflict or anything like that, but just by the elements and years of neglect. I used an offcut from the back to help build up some of the earth in front of the wall, and then I piled on a few of those bricks. And I also used my finger and pressed on the front to create a more inconsistent surface, make it look a little bit less perfect. I then twisted together some wires to create a little branch or root growing across the wall. I then used a hot glue gun to try and create some little fingers and branches, and I think there's potential here, but the hot glue was a little too hot, so it ended up pooling and I didn't like the way it looked. Luckily, I covered it all up with moss, so couldn't really tell in the end. I used the foot mount that came with the model and attached that to the base. Then I mixed up some paint, Mod Podge, plaster, and water, and I applied that liberally across all of the dirt areas. When that was dry, I used a Mod Podge and gray paint mix to paint all of the bricks. I then moved over to Forger for the iPad, where I modeled the Nexu using a few reference photos. This did take me quite a while. I am still fairly new to 3D modeling, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I decided to only print a portion of the model and mount it on the back instead of having the entire thing, which worked out really well because it was the perfect size for my printer. The print turned out really nicely, so I began removing the supports, and when I popped it off of the printing bed, like a nice little resin fruit gusher, it exploded all over my workstation. Luckily that paper towel was there and I was wearing gloves, so I was able to get that cleaned up in no time. I then removed the rest of the supports and put it in the UV curing machine. I had measured the diorama a little incorrectly the first time, so I added another piece of foam as a spacer, and then I cut out a piece of plywood on the back to hold up the Nexu. I then glued the back piece to the bottom with some wood glue and some brackets, and it was time to move on to the plants. My friend Mark makes a bunch of awesome 1:12 scale dioramas, and I've seen him use these before. Definitely go check out his work. I will link that below. While I was at the hobby store, I also saw some cool stuff, including this moss mat, which I don't know what the purpose of this stuff is originally, but for me, it's going to make the perfect forest floor. It's basically just a bunch of little pieces of moss and grass glued to some mesh that can be easily cut to any shape. And the size of the moss and grass lends itself very nicely to fit into a 1:12 scale model. I'm looking forward to using this stuff more in the future. This was definitely the most fun part of the build for me. I am not used to doing such heavy vegetation, especially in a 1:12 scale diorama, but I had a lot of fun with it. Just kind of went crazy, adding little pieces of grass and plants and real dirt and fake dirt, and using a lot of techniques that I have seen from creators such as Luke Towan and Kathy Millett. This was definitely super fun. And I think the thing that tied it all together was this light flocking that I added, this light colored turf. Really helped tie everything together, make it feel mossy and wet. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with this one. I did add a little bit of a darker green color to the middle of those plants to help them look a little bit more natural. And then I stuck those in place. Then moved on to figuring out how to mount the Nexu to the back. I used some wooden dowels, which I ran up the model, and those worked out really well. Then it was time to move on to the paint. After that was done, I moved on to weathering the Stormtrooper and getting his blaster to light up. I used a pin vise to hollow out the barrel, creating a nice pathway for the wiring. I did break a few LED filaments along the way. They are very fragile. And I'm powering it with a coin battery mounted in an LED candle. These filaments do give off a lot of nice light, but they are pretty fragile. I have pretty much completely switched to the 3-volt filaments. I can only find them on AliExpress though, so if you plan on doing any projects like this of your own using these filaments, make sure to order them pretty far in advance. They take like a month to arrive, which is a first world problem, but definitely something to plan for. After all the wiring was through his leg, I drilled a hole in the base for the wiring to pass through, and I pulled the leads from the battery through that hole, and then I soldered everything together on the other side. I then went over all of the red wires with some black paint to make sure those were hidden, and I used a 2-part epoxy, which I smeared all over the Nexu and the dowels before fixing it in place. And then used some hot glue to create a little bit of a muzzle flash or flare from the blaster bolt. And to finish everything off, I used some black 3.0 to paint the sides of the diorama, and I called it good. that is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun with this one. Have a great week. I will see you all next time.